What if I told you that somewhere in rural Montana, there sits an abandoned house with a rotary phone that still rings? What if I told you that this phone has been disconnected for over 30 years, yet it continues to receive calls from people who claim to be calling from tomorrow? And what if I told you that every single prediction made through this cursed device has come true, bringing nothing but death and madness to those who dare to answer? This is the story of the temporal phone of Whitefish, Montana. A story so bizarre that the local authorities buried it, the phone company denied it ever existed, and the few witnesses who remain refuse to speak about what they experienced. But tonight, I'm going to tell you everything. The year was 1993. Margaret Hollow, a 72-year-old widow, lived alone in a modest two-story house on Birch Lane in Whitefish, Montana. Margaret had been using the same black rotary phone since 1958, a sturdy Bell system model that had faithfully served her through decades of conversations with friends, family, and the occasional wrong number. But on March 15, 1993, something changed. Margaret had just finished her evening tea when the phone rang at exactly 9:47 p.m. She answered as she always did, with a polite hello, "This is Margaret." The voice on the other end was her own, but older, more frail, speaking with an urgency that chilled her to the bone. "Margaret, this is you calling from March 18th. Listen carefully. Tomorrow, Mrs. Peterson from next door will slip on her front steps and break her hip. She'll be lying there for 4 hours before anyone finds her. Go check on her at 8:30 in the morning." The line went dead. Margaret stood frozen, the receiver trembling in her arthritic hands. She knew it had to be a prank, but the voice was unmistakably hers, down to the slight lisp she'd developed after losing her front tooth in a childhood accident. More disturbing still, the voice knew about her habit of calling herself Margaret when she answered the phone, something she'd done since her husband passed away 7 years earlier. The next morning, Margaret couldn't shake the unsettling call from her mind. At 8:15, she found herself peering through her kitchen window at Mrs. Peterson's house. At exactly 8:30, she watched in horror as her elderly neighbor stepped out to collect the newspaper, slipped on a patch of ice that had formed overnight, and crashed down onto the concrete steps with a sickening crack. Margaret rushed outside and found Mrs. Peterson conscious but unable to move, her hip clearly broken. As the ambulance took her away, Mrs. Peterson gripped Margaret's hand and whispered, "Thank God you were watching. I could have died out here." That night, the phone rang again at 9:40-7. This time, the voice was different. It was Harold Jameson, Margaret's neighbor from 3 houses down. But he sounded decades older and spoke with the rasp of a dying man. "Margaret, it's Harold. I'm calling you from April 2nd, 1994. Tomorrow night, my house is going to catch fire. It starts in the basement, from that old electrical box I've been meaning to fix. I die in the fire, Margaret. My wife makes it out, but I don't. You have to warn me, please." Margaret knew Harold well. He was 45 years old, a healthy construction worker with a booming laugh and a thick mustache. The voice on the phone sounded like an old man on his deathbed. The next morning, Margaret walked to Harold's house and knocked on the door. When Harold answered, she studied his face carefully. He looked exactly as she remembered, young and vibrant. But when she told him about the call and begged him to check his electrical box, his expression grew grave. "That's impossible, Margaret. How could you know about the electrical box? I haven't told anyone about the sparks I've been seeing down there." Harold went down to his basement and discovered that the main electrical box was indeed dangerously faulty, with exposed wires that could have sparked a deadly fire at any moment. He called an electrician that very day. 2 weeks later, Harold knocked on Margaret's door. He looked pale and shaken. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. Last night, I had the most vivid dream. I was 70 years old, lying in a hospital bed, dying of lung cancer. And in the dream, I was making a phone call. I was calling you, in 1993, to warn you about a fire that was going to kill me. But here's the thing that's driving me crazy. In the dream, I remembered making that call, I remembered your phone number. I remembered the sound of your voice, and I remembered the fear in my chest as I begged you to save my younger self." Margaret felt her blood run cold. "Harold, that's exactly what happened. You called me. Your future self called me." From that night forward, Margaret's phone became a conduit for temporal horror. Every evening at 9:47, the phone would ring. Sometimes it was her own voice, sometimes it was neighbors, sometimes it was complete strangers. But they all claimed to be calling from the future. And they all brought warnings. On March 23rd, Margaret received a call from Dr. Rebecca Torres, a woman she'd never met, calling from June 8, 2001. Dr. Torres warned Margaret that a young girl named Emma Walsh would be abducted from Whitefish Elementary School the following Tuesday. The call provided specific details about the kidnapper's vehicle, his planned route, and the exact time of the attempted abduction. Margaret called the police, but they dismissed her as a confused elderly woman. Frustrated and desperate, she contacted the school directly. The principal, Janet Morrison, was skeptical but agreed to increase security as a precaution. On Tuesday morning, a man in a blue pickup truck, exactly matching the description from the call, attempted to lure Emma Walsh away from the school playground. Thanks to the increased security, he was immediately apprehended. Emma was safe, but the incident left everyone shaken. Detective Ray Sullivan was assigned to investigate. He found Margaret's story preposterous until he cross-referenced the details. Everything matched perfectly. The suspect's name, his vehicle, his criminal background, even the specific route he had planned to take. Details that would have been impossible for Margaret to know through conventional means. Word of the prediction spread through the small town. And soon Margaret's house became a focal point of fear and fascination. Some residents begged her to ask the callers about their own futures. Others accused her of being involved in dark magic or worse. But the calls continued, growing more frequent and more disturbing. On April 1st, Margaret received a call from her deceased husband, Robert, claiming to be calling from beyond the veil of death on April 1st, 2010. His voice was hollow and distant, like an echo from a deep well. "Margaret, my darling. I need to warn you about our daughter Susan. She's going to receive some test results next week. Cancer. Stage 4. But if she starts treatment immediately, if she sees Dr. Harrison at the cancer center in Missoula, she can beat it. Please, Margaret, save our daughter." Susan lived in Seattle and rarely called. When Margaret phoned her daughter and begged her to see a doctor, Susan was annoyed and resistant. But Margaret's desperation was so palpable that Susan finally agreed to a checkup, just to put her mother's mind at ease. The tests revealed aggressive cervical cancer that was on the verge of metastasizing. Dr. Harrison, the exact doctor her deceased father had named, confirmed that if the cancer had gone undetected for even 2 more weeks, it would have been terminal. Susan's life was saved, but the emotional toll on Margaret was devastating. Hearing her dead husband's voice, knowing that somehow he was still watching over their family from beyond death, left her questioning everything she believed about life, death, and the nature of reality. Detective Sullivan began documenting every call, every prediction, every outcome. In 6 months, Margaret received 43 calls from the future, 43 predictions, 43 events that came true with terrifying accuracy. But the calls came with a price. Margaret began aging rapidly. Her hair, which had been silver, turned completely white within weeks. Deep lines carved themselves into her face, and her hands developed a permanent tremor. She lost 15 pounds and complained of constant nightmares about events she'd never experienced but somehow remembered. Dr. Elizabeth Crane, Margaret's physician, was baffled by her rapid decline. All medical tests came back normal, but Margaret appeared to be aging at an accelerated rate. When pressed for an explanation, Margaret would only say that the future is a heavy burden to carry. The most disturbing call came on September 13th. The voice belonged to Margaret again, but this version sounded ancient, barely human. She claimed to be calling from January 15th, 2020. "Margaret, this is your final warning. Stop answering the phone. The calls are killing you. Each time you change the future, each time you prevent a tragedy, you absorb the temporal energy. You're aging decades with every call. If you continue, you'll be dead before Christmas. But I need to tell you about the Hartley family. On September 21st, their house will fill with carbon monoxide while they sleep. The parents and their twin boys will all die unless you warn them. You have to choose, Margaret, your life, or theirs. Margaret stared at the phone after the line went dead. She looked at her hands, now gnarled and spotted like those of a woman 30 years older. She thought about her daughter Susan, alive because of the calls. She thought about Mrs. Peterson, Harold, little Emma Walsh, and dozens of others who had been saved. On September 20th, Margaret called the Hartley family and warned them about the carbon monoxide leak. They initially dismissed her as a crank caller, but her detailed knowledge of their home's layout and their family's routines convinced them to have their heating system inspected. The technician found a cracked heat exchanger that was leaking deadly levels of carbon monoxide into their home. The family had been hours away from death. Margaret died in her sleep on December 23, 1993. She was found by Harold Jameson, who had been checking on her daily since the phone calls began. Her death certificate listed natural causes, but Dr. Crane privately noted that Margaret's body showed signs of extreme aging that were medically inexplicable. The phone was disconnected the day after Margaret's funeral. But the story doesn't end there. In January 1994, the house was sold to a young couple, David and Sarah Mitchell. They moved the old rotary phone to the basement. Dismissing the previous owner's strange reputation as small-town superstition, on February 14th, exactly at 9:47 p.m., the disconnected phone in their basement began to ring. David went downstairs to investigate and found the old rotary phone somehow functioning despite being unplugged from the wall. When he answered, he heard his own voice, aged and desperate. "David, this is you calling from February 14th, 2019. Listen to me very carefully. Tomorrow, Sarah is going to have a miscarriage. You don't know she's pregnant yet. She was planning to surprise you for Valentine's Day. If she goes to Dr. Peterson at the clinic instead of the emergency room, if she gets the right treatment within the first hour, she can save the pregnancy. But you have to act fast." David dropped the phone and ran upstairs. When he told Sarah about the call, she stared at him in shock before revealing that she was indeed pregnant and had planned to tell him the next day. The following afternoon, Sarah began experiencing severe cramping. Instead of going to the emergency room as they initially planned, David insisted they see Dr. Peterson at the clinic. The quick intervention saved their pregnancy. 9 months later, Sarah gave birth to healthy twin girls. But, like Margaret before them, the Mitchells began aging rapidly after answering the temporal calls. Within 2 years, they looked decades older. They sold the house and moved away. But not before warning the new owners about the phone. The house changed hands 7 more times between 1996 and 2003. Every family experienced the same phenomenon: calls from future versions of themselves or their neighbors. Accurate predictions, lives saved, and rapid aging as the price for tampering with time's natural flow. Dr. Raymond Kessler, a physicist from the University of Montana, became interested in the case after his sister bought the house in 2001. Dr. Kessler had always been skeptical of supernatural claims, but when he witnessed his sister aging 10 years in 6 months after answering the mysterious calls, he began investigating. His research led him to a disturbing discovery. In 1957, the year before Margaret first got her phone, a small plane had crashed just outside Whitefish. The pilot was Dr. Samuel Thornfield, a quantum physicist who had been working on classified government research related to temporal mechanics and communication across time barriers. Dr. Thornfield's research notes, declassified decades later, revealed that he had been experimenting with quantum entanglement as a means of sending information backward through time. His final entry, written the day before the crash, described a successful breakthrough in creating what he called a temporal communication loop. The crash site was less than half a mile from Margaret's house. Dr. Kessler theorized that Dr. Thornfield's experimental equipment scattered across the crash site had somehow created a temporal anomaly that affected the phone lines in the immediate area. But Dr. Kessler's investigation came to an abrupt end when he received a call on the infamous phone. The voice was his own, calling from 2000. "I find Raymond, you need to stop your research immediately. The temporal loop is spreading. What started as one phone line has begun affecting others. In my timeline, half the phones in Montana are receiving calls from the future. The temporal paradoxes are tearing apart the fabric of reality itself. Burn the house down, destroy the phone, end this before it consumes everything." Dr. Kessler was found dead in his hotel room the next morning. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but witnesses reported that his body appeared to have aged decades overnight. The house on Birch Lane has been abandoned since 2003. The local authorities have declared it structurally unsound, though no inspector has ever found any actual damage to the building. A chain-link fence surrounds the property, and warning signs posted by the county advise people to stay away. But according to several residents of Whitefish, on certain nights, particularly around 9:47 p.m., you can still hear a phone ringing inside the empty house. The sound carries on the wind, a lonely, insistent call from tomorrow, waiting for someone to answer and learn the terrible price of knowing the future. Local teenagers sometimes dare each other to sneak onto the property and listen for the phone. Most are too frightened to get close to the house, but a few have reported hearing voices through the walls, dozens of different voices, all talking at once, all warning about events that haven't happened yet, all begging someone, anyone, to listen and help change what's coming. In 2018, a paranormal investigation team from the Discovery Channel attempted to film an episode about the house. They set up cameras throughout the property and waited for the mysterious phone calls. At exactly 9:47 p.m., their equipment detected an incoming phone call to the house. Despite the fact that the phone service had been disconnected for 15 years, the team's leader, paranormal investigator Marcus Webb, decided to enter the house and attempt to answer the call. The footage shows him walking down to the basement, where the old rotary phone sits covered in 15 years of dust. As he approaches the phone, it begins to ring. Marcus reaches for the receiver, and just as his hand touches it, all the cameras simultaneously malfunction. When the equipment comes back online, 30 seconds later, Marcus is gone. He was found 3 days later, wandering the streets of Whitefish with no memory of the previous 72 hours. But the most disturbing detail was his appearance. Marcus, who had been 35 years old when he entered the house, now looked like a man in his 80s. His hair had turned white, his skin was deeply lined, and he moved with the frail shuffle of someone near the end of their life. Marcus never spoke publicly about what happened in the basement, but in a private interview with his family, he reportedly said that he had spoken to dozens of different versions of himself, all calling from different points in the future, all warning him about catastrophes he could prevent. He claimed that each conversation had stolen years from his life, and that by the time he realized what was happening, he was too weak to hang up the phone. Marcus Webb died 6 months later from complications related to what doctors described as premature aging syndrome. He was 36 years old. The house remains abandoned to this day. The phone company has confirmed that there are no active lines running to the property. Yet local residents continue to report hearing the phone ring at 9:47 p.m., especially during times of local crisis or impending tragedy. Some believe that the temporal loop created by Dr. Thornfield's experiments has become self-sustaining, feeding off the life force of anyone who dares to answer the calls from tomorrow. Others theorize that the phone has become a focal point for the spirits of all those who sacrificed their lives to save others, forever trapped in a cycle of reaching back through time to prevent disasters they remember from their future. But perhaps the most terrifying theory is that the phone calls are real, that somewhere in the quantum foam of spacetime, there exist versions of ourselves living through every possible future. desperately trying to warn their past selves about the horrors that await them, and that the price of this knowledge, the cost of changing fate itself, is the very essence of life. Tonight, as you sleep in your warm bed, remember Margaret Hollow, who chose to die young so that others might live. Remember the families who sacrificed decades of their lives to save their neighbors from tragedies that hadn't happened yet. And remember that somewhere in Montana, in an abandoned house on Birch Lane, an old rotary phone sits waiting in the darkness, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to answer the next call from tomorrow. The question isn't whether the phone will ring again. The question is, if it were ringing right now, if you could hear it calling to you from your own future, would you have the courage to pick it up? And more importantly, would you have the strength to survive what you might learn? In Whitefish, Montana, the past and future exist in the same moment, separated only by the width of a telephone wire and the courage of those who dare to bridge the gap between what was and what might be. But remember this warning from all who came before. Knowledge of tomorrow comes at the cost of today, and the future always demands payment in full. The phone is still ringing. It's always ringing. The only question is whether you're listening.